Chinese and US officials have held candid and productive talks in Beijing this week, with both sides agreeing to maintain communication channels. Joining us live with more is Professor Peter Dean, Director of Foreign Policy and Defence at the United States Study Centre. Peter, good to see you. Thank you. Would it be overstating it to call those talks a breakthrough of sorts?
Oh, look, unfortunately, I think so. What we've seen is a good bit of progress here, and of course dialogue is critically important. Avoiding isolation and keeping lines of communication is really important. And of course our Prime Minister reiterated that at the Shangri-La Dialogue, but we also know at the Shangri-La Dialogue that Secretary Austin from the United States asked to meet with his Chinese counterpart, which was refused. They only got as far as a handshake. And we've seen a significant number of efforts by the Biden administration to engage with China more directly at much more senior levels than we've seen here, largely being rebuffed by China. So this is part of an ongoing positioning by China, where we've only seen in recent weeks that they've been undertaking intercepts of US aircraft flying in international airspace, getting dangerously close to those aircraft, undertaking dangerous manoeuvres, and then having a dialogue here and talking about more dialogue, which is great. And we've got to keep these lines of communications open. But until we see some really steady and significant progress here from China in working towards having a more structured approach to these dialogues and with the region. And of course, what has been spoken about a lot in the region, and in particular by our Prime Minister at the Shangri-La Dialogue recently, is the need for guardrails to avoid escalation for these incidents that could occur by dangerous activities in the South China Sea or the East China Sea and spilling over into potential conflict. So we've got to remain optimistic. It's great that they're speaking, but I wouldn't really regard this as any significant breakthrough at this point in time until we see more substantial outcomes from more meetings.
Well, because at that Singapore summit that you mentioned there, I mean, there was a bit of war of words in terms of some of the public comments that were made from the Chinese side compared to the US side.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Chinese position on this seems to be accusing the United States and other powers of sort of intimidating China or doing actions that conform with international law from the US and Australia and other countries' perspectives, and saying that unless people respect that, they won't speak to, China won't speak to them. And of course, what is that attempt is to change the status quo, to try and force states into accepting China's particular view and position of these things. And if you did a bit of fact-checking of the Chinese speeches at the Shangri-La Dialogue, you would see that they were riddled with inconsistencies and riddled with things that were very much from a Chinese perspective and not really broadly accepted by the region, and certainly not broadly accepted by the United States and its allies and partners in the region.